everybody. Welcome to the Continual panel room and this current episode of Hot Off the Press. We'll be discussing the Trick or Treat at Caynham Castle Halloween Romance Anthology. I'm your moderator, Nancy Northcott, and I'm also a contributor to the anthology. With me tonight are two of my fellow contributors, Jeanne Adams and Gail Z. Martin, writing as Morgan Bryce. Unfortunately, our fourth contributor, Karen Crane, could not be with us tonight. Jeanne, why don't you tell everyone what Caynham Castle is?
Well, Caynham Castle is a castle on the Welsh border in England. When the castle was originally built, of course, it was to guard the English lines from the Welsh, and we created the castle based on an existing castle, but then we added all our flourishes and the things we needed, and the stories in it started with Christmas at Caynham Castle, in which there were 7 contributors, the 3 of us, and then 4 other people. And then we decided we wanted to do it again.
And Gail, can you tell everybody why we picked Halloween for this outing?
Well, you know, there was a huge amount of world building that went into creating Caynham Castle and Caynham on Ledwich, which is the town outside of the castle. And we looked at this and said, geez, this was a lot of work to just do one thing. Let's do other holidays too. So I don't know if the next one is going to be Easter at Caynham Castle or Valentine's Day at Caynham Castle or, you know, something else. But at least for now, we've got Trick or Treat at Caynham Castle. And it gave us a sufficient amount of time to recover from Christmas before we had to start doing Halloween. And of course, you know, since it is set in the UK, it's a little different than an American Halloween as well.
Well, and we'll also, going forward in the time frame for the anthology, we're also encompassing Bonfire Night, which used to commemorate, or I guess it still does commemorate, Guy Fawkes Day, the failed attempt to blow up the Houses of Parliament in the early 1600s. And so that's in its way a bigger holiday than Halloween. But Halloween is getting to be more popular in the UK, and we all love Halloween, so hey, you know.
And it's our book, so we got to do it.
Yes. And so let's talk about the way this anthology interlocks with our independent worlds. Jeanne, do you want to take that one?
Sure. As everybody can probably see behind me, my series, which starts with the novel The Witch's Walk, is what I use to tie into the Caynham Castle series. My Christmas story involves a witch from Haven Harbor, Massachusetts, which is my world from The Witch's Walk. And she actually ends up getting engaged to the Earl of Caynham. So she still shows up in the Halloween story. And then I have another denizen of Haven Harbor, Massachusetts show up in the Welsh marches at Caynham to take on another adventure for Halloween.
Gail, how about you?
Well, for the Christmas book last year, I used 2 characters from one of my Gail Z. Martin books, Teague Logan and Anthony Bennett from the Deadly Curiosities series, and actually had written into the prior Deadly Curiosities novel that Anthony got Teague the trip to England to stay in a real castle as a over-the-top birthday present. And then we did the anthology with that story of this is what happens when they get there. This time, it's a character from my Morgan Bryce series, Treasure Trail, with Eric Mitchell, who used to chase down art fraud and relic misappropriation. And then after he got shot a few times, he decided that was a little too dangerous, and he left that life and came to Cape May, New Jersey, where he now runs an antique shop and a blog. And his boyfriend, Ben Nolan, who was a cop and then a private investigator in Newark, New Jersey, and now he's in Cape May running his aunt's vacation rental property, and they get together in Treasure Trail. And as it turns out, Eric knew the Earl from Caynham Castle because they had worked together on a task force chasing down some art fraud years ago. And now they've shown up because the Earl said, come anytime. And Eric brought Ben, and now here they are.
Well, and isn't the story tied into their knowledge of antiquities? Don't you play off that in both
Sure.
stories, really, don't you?
Yeah. Eric's an expert with antiquities, so he can walk into an antique store over there or a church over there and go, oh my gosh, and he knows the artist that created the mosaic, or he has that's his specialty. And he also has some supernatural abilities to go with that. So yeah, definitely.
Well,
And
Jeanne,
in mine, excuse me, and in mine, in the Christmas at Caynham Castle, the Earl and his now fiance, B. Alden, stumble on a hidden room in the castle that the Earl had no idea was there. And so the characters in Trick or Treat at Caynham Castle are actually there to catalog and investigate, in an archaeological sense, the rooms and the secret passages and all that sort of thing. And the hero is a photographer, and the heroine is an archaeologist. So. But what about your story, Nancy? We don't want to leave you out of this because your story is fun.
but I was enjoying being in charge, so or having the illusion of being in charge anyway. Jeanne, Gail, you probably are aware that Jeanne and I were in an anthology a few years ago that was a shared world anthology. And I thought when we got kind of covered this anthology, we would talk a little bit about shared world writing in case there's somebody out there who's interested in having a go at that. But we each had to write a novella taking place in the same place on the same night. And that novella for me launched a spy series with a multinational covert organization named Arachnid that I had set up. So my stories for Caynham Castle are romantic suspense featuring agents from the Arachnid agency. And my Christmas story was about an agent whose father had recently died and was receiving an award for his service to the Caynham Castle Foundation because he was a historian. He had written the history of the Marcher Lords of Caynham Castle. So he was here to get this award to commemorate his father's work. The fly in the ointment is there's an assassin after him. And so that was kind of fun to do a little bit of action adventure in there. And my story for this time is a second chance at love story. It's two Arachnid agents who trained together, had an affair, broke up messily because don't they always, and then they're back at the castle. But you know, one of the things I like about this kind of series is that everybody in our little contributor group can find a way to make it work for her series that she's writing outside it. So, you know, we don't have stories that are outliers for everything else that we're doing. We have stories that we can slot into other things that we're doing.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing there comes to being aware of timing, because that was something I had to fix on this last go through on mine. Was I realized that it was another whole year. It wasn't this coming October in book world. So the last book had already happened. That was a whole year later. So there was a decision that had to get tweaked a little bit because they would have already made one level of that decision beforehand. So sometimes just keeping the timing straight and how it fits in takes a little extra.
Well, and one of the things I have to do with my story is, because you finished first, and so the person who finished first kind of sets the timetable. And so I have to go back and look at your story again and be sure that what happens on a particular day in your story is correctly referenced in mine. You know, if something in your story happens on Thursday, I can't have that happening on Tuesday. You know, that becomes a mess. And, you know, I sometimes think that's not something readers care nearly as much about as we do. but I do think that getting it right adds a cohesive note that makes the whole thing mesh a little better, maybe.
And there will be that one reader on Goodreads who says, novella A had them having breakfast at 10, novella B had them having breakfast at 10:30. They would have crossed paths in the dining room and you never mentioned that. You know there'll be somebody.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's like the people who say, well, it's really green kryptonite that can kill Superman, but in your story, you had Superman killed by purple kryptonite, and that's not what purple kryptonite does. And, you know, having been one of those obnoxious geeks myself, I'm not really complaining, but I just think it's a notice to all of us to be ready for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we did that other anthology, and I'm not referencing the anthology because it's not available for sale anymore. Otherwise, I would be, you know, pushing it shamelessly. But all the events took place on one night. So we actually had a chart, like the ending is 0 hour. And it's 0 hour minus 30 minutes, can't even talk tonight, 0 hour minus an hour, and so forth. And it was a grid that you remember that, Jeanne?
I do.
And we plotted what's happening in each other's stories for that very same reason. Because when my people go down to the kitchen, Suze's people can't be going through there to escape unless I have to say something about it if they are. So,
yeah.
Jeanne, you're laughing. Were you going to add anything?
Yeah, it just was, the grid was painful, as I recall. And all of us had to adjust at least one thing in our stories because, as you say, Nancy, you can't have somebody running into the bad guys that the other person just shot and having them still be alive. So we had some that one was some very close meshing. This Caynham Castle hasn't required quite as much of that. We did all need to coordinate details, and there are mini maps and much discussion went into where does the dining hall sit and what rooms are where. And for me, that's fun. I don't know if it is for y'all, but I found it quite fun.
Well, with the Christmas one, for example, I really wanted to nail down where the big public Christmas tree was so that we didn't have a 30-foot Christmas tree that mysteriously moved all around the yard.
Yeah.
There. That's distracting. And we did manage to get consistency on all of the decorations, which we did on this one too. I had to go back in and put in some paper ghosts and some other things, but that's cool.
Yep.
Yep. And it's kind of fun. It's sort of a wink and a nod to drop in that little reference to somebody else's story.
Yeah.
In the book. Because even if their story isn't in the book before yours, when people get to it, it's like, I see, kind of thing. And that's...
Well, I always like that so much in other anthologies that I read, that I really appreciate when we do it, because I think, I mean, I'm a pretty typical reader. I get such a kick out of that when authors do that and reference each other's stories. And like you said, that wink and a nod. And I love, Gail, that you referenced with Anthony and Teague that they were going to go do this over the top thing. And then here's the over the top thing. I like that so much.
I think it makes it feel more real because it's like people would do it. They would plan a trip for a birthday and then they'd go on the trip and you'd want to know how it went.
Yeah.
And so to me, that just grounds it more in a sense of reality, that it isn't floating off in the void in its own little bubble. It's rooted in other things that are other people's stories or the history of the collection or your own stories. That just, to me, makes it feel so much more real.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like the shared world when you're not necessarily sharing a location. But like Gail, you write in the Bubbaverse. And so the details in the Bubbaverse stories, some of the rules are the same as in other Bubbaverse stories, right?
Mhm.
And so that common thread makes the world feel bigger because everybody's moving on a large canvas instead of just their own little corner of it, I think.
Well, that's why all of my urban fantasy stories that I write as Gail Z. Martin or Morgan Bryce all cross over. A, because I couldn't keep that many different universes separate. And B, that way they all know each other. They show up in each other's books. They call each other for help. They work together. And that even comes up in this story because while Eric and Ben are from Treasure Trail, they make reference of what Teague and Anthony told them, you know, was a good place to eat or where the gargoyles were or those kinds of things. And then Soren, who's the nearly 600-year-old vampire in Deadly Curiosities and all the other books, is known to the Earl's family. And so he doesn't show up, but he's mentioned by name. So yeah, it just makes it feel bigger and grounded.
I have the character who was the heroine in my story for that anthology that was all in the same night, had a bit part in a story that Jeanne, in an anthology that Jeanne and Karen and I did together. She has a supporting role in this story. She's not the heroine, but she's the backup for the hero and the heroine. And then sometime late this year or early next, depending on how life goes, she's going to get her happily ever after with the guy from the first story, because that ended with them. It's a happy for now ending. And so then, and it's kind of fun to go back and revisit people and say, well, they were happy, but they didn't seal the deal. And so she's going to get her chance to seal the deal. And it's kind of fun to play with that with them. And I think it makes the characters seem more real when they have friends beyond their immediate little sphere.
Well, in the ongoing lives, I mean, one of the things that's fun about revisiting Caynham Castle is, you know, obviously, as Gail said, we put in a lot of work to create the world. So yeah, worth going back to. But also it's like kind of going home for the holidays. You know the people, the same bellman take your bags, and the same desk clerk is there to greet you, and the decorations are a little different, but the people are just as welcoming and friendly, and you can just step into the adventure without much trouble. And that's one of the things I love about doing this kind of thing, and especially doing it with y'all and Karen Crane, who couldn't be with us tonight, who's in Trick or Treat at Caynham Castle and was also in Christmas at Caynham Castle, but also Ceresia Glass and Anna Sugden and Donna McMeans, who were in the Christmas at Caynham Castle. Playing with them in this world was just super fun because everybody had something to add.
Well, and I think the other thing that's kind of cool is you get to see the world through different characters' eyes. So Teague and Anthony are very different people with very different life experiences and areas of expertise, as well as supernatural abilities, than Ben and Eric. And so what they know, what matters to them, Ben has never been out of the US before. Eric has traveled extensively and ran in high circles based on what he did. So Ben's first impression when they get to the castle is, holy crap, it's a castle. And Eric says, you knew we were coming to a castle. Yeah, but it's a castle. And Eric said, yes, I tricked you by telling you we were coming to a castle. But to Ben, it's that experience that I had the first time I went to the UK and saw a real frickin' castle, that we don't have those over here. We have some big houses we've built more, but we don't have a castle. And I just...
Especially not one that's been there for 700 years.
You make fun of the people who go to New York City and have never seen the tall buildings before, and they stand there looking up because you're in a trench of man-made buildings. I was doing that with castles, like, wow, castle. So Ben kind of has that experience, and Eric finds it really charming, but with Tegan and Anthony, totally different life experience. So it's fun to see the world through different characters' eyes is what I took a long time to say, sorry.
Well, and you know, for me, picking up on that, I'm a castle geek too. I mean, castles are my jam. And I like to look at the Great Hall, and I like to imagine what it would have been like when the whole castle household was assembled there for dinner. And there's a castle actually on the Welsh Marches where the outer courtyard is 5 acres. And I can see a military force in my head assembling there before they march out. And it's such a secure place to assemble. And I sort of imagine people in period dress going through the towers, and yet my spies don't geek out about the castle. I mean, the heroine in this story kind of has a minute of a geek out, but wow, it's really great. But they're looking at it from the standpoint of what are the safe approaches? Where are the weak points? In my Christmas story, the heroine looks at the fire escape door in their room on the top of the tower and goes, yeah, any exit can also be an entrance. And she puts explosive bolts on it. And the hero is, are you crazy? That door is hundreds of years old. And she goes, nah, the door's new. Besides which, it'll cost less to replace the door than to replace you. So we're doing this. And so it's kind of fun for me to step outside my, oh my gosh, it's a castle. Oh my gosh, I bet they did this over here and that over there. And this is so wonderful. And it's really too bad they didn't have toilets, to think about, you know, if it's an object to be defended, you know, it's a different mindset. Jeannie, what?
I'm still stuck on the toilet.
Sorry, but they didn't. So,
A mittens or a guard robe.
I don't know, it just tickled me.
well, and you know, I went and I took all those pictures, as y'all know, that I barraged you all with. Look at this, and isn't this cool? And look at that, and isn't that neat? And then we proceeded to change it all around. And
Which
then
freaks me
Jeannie,
out, I know.
demonstrating her masochistic tendency, said, I'll draw the floor plan. And so she draws a floor plan, and somebody said, well, can we have a terrace off the back? And Jeannie's like, sure. And she puts a terrace off the back, and somebody else goes, we need a gift shop. We need a gift shop over here. And so Jeannie goes, I'll put a gift shop, and she generates another set of drawings. And then I'm like, wait, the tower my people are staying in is totally walled off. There's no door from the courtyard. What are we going to do? Jeannie goes, I can fix that. It's like, and it was just, I would not have had the patience to do what Jeannie did, but I was so glad she did it, because it makes it, that way we're all describing the same place when our characters are moving through it. And I do think that's matters.
And then she did the series Bible as well. And so I kept coming back to her and going, okay, well, where in this crypt are people buried? Are they buried in drawers? Are they buried in a wall crypt? You know, how does this work? And when did they start doing it? And all these really weird little things, but I had to get them right and make them mesh up with everybody else. And I didn't want to assume. So I asked her a gazillion really weird questions that are now in the series Bible.
Yes.
They are now canon.
Huh? What?
I said they are now canon.
They are canon. One of the things that Jeannie came up with for her Christmas story, and since she's created the Earl of Caynham, who owns the whole shebang, she had to kind of figure out how do you keep the lights on, because taxes on places like that are so high in the UK. And so she came up with the Earl running this bee industry. You know, he has beehives all over. I swear there are more beehives on the latest drawing than there were on the last drawing, but that's okay.
I sneak in a couple more every now and again.
Yeah. So my hero in this one thinks this whole bee thing is ridiculous. And that's his motif. Yeah, we're on the Earl of Caynham's private land with his private bees. Whoop-de-doo. You know, it's like, but it's a wink and a nod to the bee industry in the story.
Well, and the Earl also has a brewery on the outskirts of town. And I put in a wink and a nod in that. When we were in Scotland several years ago, we visited Inverary Castle, and it, again, has had to figure out how to make ends meet. You have the Duke of Argyll, as in socks and sweaters, who married the heiress to the Cadbury chocolate fortune, and that's who runs the castle. But it is self-sustaining, and they have a restaurant and a gift shop. But they told us on the tour, and if you're in the restaurant, it doesn't happen every day, but he is there a lot of times. If you see a guy wearing an apron that says Duke, it's the Duke.
Oh, how cool is that?
So I put something in about, and if you visit the Earl's Brewery and you see a guy with an apron that says Earl, that's him.
But you know, the nice thing about that is we have room to add. You know, if there's something else, we just have to be careful not to undo what we've already done.
Right.
But we can add things to what we've got as we go along. But even that's kind of funny, because you send out an email to everybody. In fact, I'm about to do that this week, going, is it going to mess anybody up if we put a gate to the inner ward that you can't see because it's kind of situated behind the chapel? Because fire escape, and not every tower has a fire escape that goes outside, and you don't want people trapped in that courtyard if the buildings are on fire. So they have to have a way to get out of the curtain wall, even though that would probably make the original builders of the castle spin in their nice tombs in the crypt.
Well, and I think the other thing that is really fun for me about something like this is the serendipitous things that come up when you research. So, you know, my guys think they're just going to go have a vacation and eat some of those yummy little cakes at the tea shop, and they end up solving a 700-year-old mystery involving the Knights Templar. And one of the things that shows up in the story is inspired by a real location that I mentioned in the story where the same thing exists, only, you know, minus the treasure. But I didn't know that when I started the story. I didn't know that when I said, hey, I wonder if there'd be a connection with the Knights Templar. Oh, look, wow, that's really cool. And that to me is the serendipity and the fun of pulling these things together. When you find that research piece that is exactly what you needed, but you didn't know it was what you needed until you found it.
Yeah.
And some of the rabbit holes are just so much fun.
Well, like what?
Well, as you both know, for Trick or Treat at Caynham Castle, we actually created a forest adjacent to the castle called the Forest of Saxon 100, which in the actual area of where this takes place, the real UK, there was an area called that, but it's not adjacent to the castle, and it is not a forest, and it has nothing to do with with any of this. But we created it because we needed a forest. So, you know, going down the rabbit hole to look at what should we name it? Well, there's this road and it's called this, and there's this road, well, maybe not. And then the whole thing with Saxon's 100 and finding out that that was a name that was originally attached to a part of the area. And, oh, that'd make a great name for the forest. That's good. And, you know, just some of the things like that, you know, investigating when I first started my story, I was going to use the aqueducts. They have canals that are like raised canals that go across miles of aqueducts, and they have these narrowboats that go down the aqueducts. I spent several days on that, didn't use it, but it was fun. I watched lots of video about people going down the aqueducts in narrowboats. It was really cool. Couldn't figure out how to use it. I started to throw somebody off of one of them, but it didn't work out for me.
I just spur of the moment killed somebody. And now I have to figure out how that's going to wrinkle through the story, because it wasn't in my original plan. But I wanted a place that was, my story involves a kidnapping. The son of a weapons developer is kidnapped, and our hero and heroine are working with the British Security Service, who are not real fond of them because they see them as sort of color outside the lines rogues, which is exactly what they are. And I wanted them to find him in an isolated place. And I discovered that they had caves in Shropshire, but they also have mines in Shropshire. So then I started looking at mining in Shropshire and what kind of mines would they be and where would they be and how would they get in and out. And I thought, wait, time out. You don't need that. So,
I did the same.
What, Gail?
I did the same thing as I was trying to figure out, what would work best for one of the climactic scenes. Yeah, hit the same things.
Yeah. And so
I don't want to say that they find something in a cave and then again that knowledgeable reader says, well, geologically there are no caves in that area because big, technical explanation. You're going, oh crap. So you have to make sure if you say there's a cave, there can be a cave. Not that there's a cave, but they could have a cave in the place you need it and the geology isn't working against you.
Yeah.
Well, it's like people saying there are hills in Texas, mountains in Texas. Well, there are some hills, but not mountains like you think there might. When somebody calls something a mountain in Texas, not what somebody from North Carolina or somebody from Colorado would think of as a mountain. And you can sometimes get yourself in real trouble with that. I'm sorry, it's very flat there. And you've already said it's rolling hills, and you're like, no, it's kind of flat.
Well, I was at a convention where a guy who is a geology professor does a class on geology for writers so that writers don't screw this up by having people like mine coal where there would be no coal or, oh, look, there's emeralds. No, geologically, you wouldn't find an emerald there. And that's his whole class, which I think is terrific. I haven't been able to take it, but I love that idea of, here's how the ground under your feet works.
Well, I don't think readers, it's like referencing something you said earlier, Nancy, most readers probably don't care. They will dive into the story, suspend any disbelief necessary, and just enjoy it. They're there for the adventure and the happily ever after. But there are some readers that it's going to pull them, they are a geologist, so it's going to pull them out of the story if you say there are caves where they're not supposed to be caves, or you say it's mountainous where it's really, really flat. So, I mean, I think it's one of our jobs as writers to make sure we try to get the details right, at least.
Well, and then there's the other type of reader, and you especially see this in cozy mystery, but I think you see it across the board. And I think of them as a sneaky learner. They're not sitting down to read a textbook, but they want to learn something new that they don't know. And so they're counting on you to not tell them something as a baseline fact that isn't true. So, if your story is about a tea shop, then what you say about tea should be factual. If your story is about a scrapbooking, and I'm just pulling this out of a couple series I've read, if it's about scrapbooking, then tell us stuff that is real about that so that they come away with some new little nugget they didn't know, but then they're not going to embarrass themselves by saying something that turns out not to be true.
Yeah.
I'm so that reader. I've actually won Trivial Pursuit many, many times on things that I learned. There's just odd little things I've learned in books. So I'm totally that sneaky learner reader.
I read it was a kind of a thriller series with a romance subplot. And the heroine was the sole survivor of a serial killer who had stashed his victims under the boardwalk on one of the beaches at the North Carolina Outer Banks. I can't remember which one that is. There are no boardwalks on the North Carolina Outer Banks. There are protected dunes on the shore at the North Carolina Outer Banks. And you can find that out from Google or a call to, all those little towns are incorporated towns, and you can call City Hall and just check that. And the author didn't do it. And it kind of, there was enough else about it that I liked that I went ahead and read it. but I don't ever want to be the writer who a reader's sitting there weighing, okay, well, this is wrong. Am I going to go ahead and read the rest of it? And we won't talk about people who think something that's wrong that's actually not, because those people are out there too. But sometimes you mess up and somebody calls you on it. And I'm happy to say that hasn't happened much, but I think it's always good to check when you can.
Yeah.
So before we move on to collaborative writing, one of the reasons that the rest of the world probably doesn't know, but I know having heard both of you talk, is that you're Halloween nuts. So nuts meant in the fondest of ways, of course. But so tell us, what is it you like so much about Halloween?
Getting dressed up and playing and having a great time, and there's candy, and I can decorate my house in orange and black and skeletons. And I mean, what is not to love about Halloween, really? Although I do have friends who absolutely despise it, but there's just nothing I don't like about it, frankly.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I was the kid who rigged up her bedroom as a haunted house one year. I was the only one who really got to see it, but I even had something that could raise its arms, and, and I was young enough then that I had to sleep with the light on after that because I kind of scared myself. But yeah, I've always loved Halloween. It's spooky. There are, ghosts and witches and all kinds of stuff, and candy. And, we're the people that in a normal year, probably not this year, because I don't know that, unless you're going to lob candy at people from a safe distance. Incoming.
A drive-by candy snatch.
I've seen all kinds of suggestions for those kinds of things. Or the kids sit in the yard and you drive past and whip candy at them. Yeah. That's really a good idea. But we're the ones on the block with the big light up inflatable 12-foot dragon with the reticulated wings, and then the 9-foot dragon next to it, and then the life-size hearse with a vampire that, rises up and down in the back. We're those people.
Yeah, and I have 9 skeletons that enact various and sundry things in the front yard every year, and this year we have a hearse with skeletons. And last year, because I'm in Washington, D.C., and the Washington Nationals were playing the World Series at Halloween, our entire skeleton team was playing baseball.
Well, of course they were.
Well, and there's a catalog that has all kinds of over-the-top decorations for all of the seasons. But particularly for Halloween, I always go through it, and the stuff's not cheap. And I always think, who on earth buys all this stuff to deck out their mansion with this and then puts it in storage? Because that would be amazing. But I always am, teeniest bit envious of being able to actually deck the house out, except if I had all those things in my house, I'd probably have to sleep with the light on again.
We were in New Orleans not long before Halloween one year. And we were taking the streetcar down St. Charles Avenue. And as you all probably know, there are those huge houses. Some of them close to the street, some of them set farther back. Some of those people, I think they must subscribe to that catalog that you were talking about, Gail, because they have skeletons and they have ghosts and they have flying witches and they have tombstones all over the yard. And it's like they really went whole hog. We just had, at one point, we had one skeleton because the boy wanted it when he was little. And we had something that made, the dry, foggy stuff. And then he went off to college and we're like, that's a lot of work. Take it down. And we don't have half as much as y'all have. And we go, they'll be happy with candy. I think they'll be happy with candy. So that's what we did. But let's talk for a minute about shared location writing, because it seems to have all the normal parameters of shared world writing with more. So how have your experiences been with shared world versus shared world and location writing?
Well, for me, it's been, this particular one, Caynham, has been one of the most fun. because the castle is fun and working with y'all is fun. And it's been so creative in the sense of designing the castle, and each of us are doing separate stories, but they're sort of floating by at the same time. And all of that makes it really fascinating. The story that you referenced earlier, Nancy, where we were sharing the world on the same day in a hotel, actually, that was incredibly complicated because all of the action was taking place simultaneously. So we really did have to look out for each other and not bump into people. And that one was a little more difficult too, because if you don't have the cooperation of the other people that you're working with, or I guess I should say not cooperation necessarily, but the investment in the project, to the degree that we all have, it doesn't work as smoothly. I've done some anthologies using my Witches Walk world, and some of those have gone well and some of them have not. And that is really a shared world, but kind of not in the sense that people can't really create things in my world. I sort of dictate that. So that's good for some people, and some people are easy to slide into that world, and some people are just like, yeah, no, doesn't work for them. But it's been a good experience by and large for me.
Well, I did a shared world story with Jeanne with the Haven Harbor world for another Halloween collection a couple of years ago. And that crossed over with my Deadly Curiosities series. And that really wasn't that hard to do because I just needed to incorporate someone who was from her world in mine. And since Deadly Curiosities is in Charleston, South Carolina, and they're just run amok with witches and supernatural creatures, what's one more? Of course he was there. Who isn't? It's kind of the place to be. So that actually worked out really well in that, you know, there was something that was missing that had been taken, and then there was this guy who had come to find it and take it back, and he fit in pretty seamlessly. You mentioned the Bubbleverse, which Larry and I write in two of John Hartness's worlds. One is the Quincy Harker Demon Hunter series, which overlaps with our Joe Mack adventures, and then the other is the Bubba the Monster Hunter world, which overlaps with our Spell, Salt, and Steel series. Those are very loosely connected. In Spell, Salt, and Steel, everybody's area is geographically separate, so there may be a comment here or there about a character somewhere else, but they don't really interact. John, and the same is true with well, my time period is completely different in the Joe Max series. So John does the high-level read-through so that nobody says one thing about, well, vampires can't do this, and then somebody else says, well, of course they can. So he keeps the continuity straight, but it's different because our characters aren't running into each other or really interacting with each other in any significant way.
Well, you know, one thing that Jeanne and I discovered on that earlier project, we all came to it with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of interest, and we parceled out the segments of the night to see who would be featured, whose story would deal with which segment of the night. And I think we did that really well. But what we didn't do was the hotel. And we got into it and discovered that the four of us were writing four somewhat different hotels. And not the best plan. And
So this again involved maps.
Yes. So poor Jeanne got the job of reconciling all the hotels and putting them into one hotel. And then everybody had to fix their stories so that we were not stepping on each other's toes all the time. And, you know, as you know, Gail, Jeanne and I write the Outcast Station series together. And having taken a lesson from this experience, before we wrote the first word of the first story, we created the world, and Jeanne, the queen of maps, drew the town so that we would, you know, if somebody's going right on Ocean Avenue, they'll come to this store. If they go left, they'll come to that one. And this is where the Marshal's headquarters is, and this is where the spaceport is, and, you know, never the twain shall be scrambled, we hope. And so then when we did Caynham, I went and took a lot of pictures. Then we used that to get kind of the ambiance and the feel of the place. And I'm anal about pictures anyway. I would rather take 20 or 30 pictures of something that I don't need and then get home and discover that the one picture of something I need is the thing I didn't bother to take a picture of. So, so that's why, you know, we have all that barrage of pictures that I sent everybody. But we're really writing our series up here because it has to meet all the parameters of the series, whatever series it is. Then we're writing the Caynham location and the town that we created, but we're also writing a shared timeline. So that's three things that we kind of have to juggle for this that we wouldn't have to if we were just doing, like if I were just writing in Trifles and Folly or in Haven Harbor, then those are the only parameters you have to worry about. But instead you have really three factors that have to mesh in order to make the story work.
And it does make it more complicated, but to my mind, it also makes it more interesting. I mean, I know both of you have written in anthologies or things where it's just a theme. Like I did one a couple of years ago that was Under the Mistletoe. And everybody's story had to have something regarding mistletoe. That was literally the only parameter. It could be 1840 in mistletoe. It could be 2075 in mistletoe. It could be 2010 in mistletoe. Just as long as it had mistletoe, it was all good. That was easy. That was fun. Everybody, but it wasn't challenging in any way because, hey, it's a story about Christmas. It's mistletoe. We're all good. Nancy and I both participated in Predators and Petticoats. The only thing there was that the character had to be female and she had to be a person who could take care of herself and stand up. That's pretty much the only parameter. Again, any time period, any world, didn't matter. So those are fun and interesting, but something like what we've created with Trick or Treat at Caynham Castle, to me is, and also Nancy, you and I doing Outcast Station, is more fun because it's more intricate. And I like that idea of sort of all three things and having to sort of balance. I'm a glutton for punishment.
Well, it was fun to create the town because everybody said, okay, for my story, I need this. And we were all in agreement that an English town on the Welsh Marches had to have a pub. And so we have a pub, and then we all kind of contributed to what the pub would look like inside. And then for Christmas, Anna Sugden actually got us permission to use the name of a tea room and knitting shop near her. And Jeanne has the refinery and the honey. And Gail, I think you created Cadwell's bookshop.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the River Adventures place that nobody's really used that, but it's sitting there waiting for someone to come along and use it. And
Karen's used Greenberry's Floral Abundance and has in her story for Trick or Treat at Caynham Castle features the flower shop again as well.
Well, and mine hinges very much on the church that is in the town.
And didn't Donna use that church in her Christmas story?
No, she used the Folly more than the church.
Okay, I'm just confused. It's been a while since.
No, she did use it in one scene, but in for the most part, she used the Folly.
Yeah. And so, but that was, if anybody's thinking about trying to do something like this, the page after the title page is the intellectual property page, the copyright page. Well, every story is copyright by its own author. But some things that crossed over were such and such copyright Jeanne Adams used with permission, copyright Gail Z. Martin used with permission. And so that added a wrinkle to the production end of the book because we wanted to get all of that straight and be sure that we had that. And for this one, I think I'm just going to send the page to everybody and say, highlight in yellow what you used that was created by someone else. And then everything that comes back to me not highlighted, I'm taking it out because the page is so long. And, you know, there are 4 of us in this one, there are not 7 of us. So we don't need all that quite as much as we did for the other.
But, you know, that brings up an interesting point, Nancy, because there are a lot of anthologies who operate in, not who, but which operate in a shared world where whoever created it, they don't want you to cross over.
Yeah.
Like, I asked Gail's permission to mention Anthony and Teague in my story in Trick or Treat at Caynham Castle, and Soren as well. Well, she could have said no, which would mean I would have to use somebody else or use some other reference, which would have been fine, except that, as Gail, you mentioned earlier, because we have those little winks and nods, it makes it feel more familiar, more like family, more like reality. And so, but there are a lot of anthologies where people don't want you using their characters. And I've been in 1 or 2 where you could make a passing reference to that character, but you could not put words in that character's mouth because that character was the intellectual property of that particular author, and he or she did not want that particular character to speak in your story. You could make passing reference to them, but you could not use them in a speaking role, as the theater.
Well, and it's kind of funny because John Hartness and I have done something like that really just to amuse ourselves and to see who saw it, where we didn't name the character, but there's sort of a walk-on cameo, and you get it or you don't. If you haven't read the other book, it's just a walk-on, you know, throwaway scene with an unimportant person you've never seen before. If you've read the other stuff, you go, oh, I see what you did there. And it was honestly to amuse ourselves, but it was kind of fun. So we've both done that a couple of times.
Yeah, and Jeanne and I've done that in Outcast Station. In general, with the Caynham Castle ones, I've tried to not put words in other people's characters' mouths, just because I feel like if I'm going to do that, I need to check that with them. For my Christmas story, I couldn't really avoid putting words in the Earl's mouth, so I pasted that into an email and sent it to Jeanne and said, is this okay? You know, because we do that with Caynham Castle too. I used her Marshall in my Christmas story, and I checked the description. I sent her the dialogue. I said, is this okay? And she said, yeah, this is okay. But if she had said, this makes me uncomfortable and I don't think this is what Brad would say, then I would have said, well, what do you think would be better? And then I would have done whatever she said, because it's her character. And I think people run into trouble when they don't respect other people's boundaries in a shared world. And that's, one blow up will end a collaboration. You just can't do that, I think.
Well, and I ended up using the Earl because I kind of had to, given what was going on at the end of the story. And I just sent Jeanne the whole story and said, tell me what I need to fix. So yeah, but that's because he's the Earl and there are some things he's going to have to be there for.
Yeah.
But I think that's another thing for me that makes these kind of collaborations fun, is when you collaborate with people that you trust to do that, it's interesting to see how they portray your character, the character you created. I mean, the Earl is a character I created, so it's fun to see him, it's like you said, Nancy, sort of see the castle from different angles from other people's stories, is to see those characters from different angles from other people's stories. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, as we're talking to people out in the audience, if you're going to do this kind of thing, make sure you trust the people you're doing it with, because if you don't, it gets very unpleasant.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's why some of the looser collaborations really have demarcations of where you can't cross those lines, and why they specify in some cases that none of the stories can have any relation to an existing series or can't be obviously part of an existing series once the anthology is down, you can file off the VIN numbers and make some edits and do whatever you want. But I think some of them try to offset those potential problems by just fencing it very carefully and saying, don't do these things.
Right.
You raised what you just said raises another good point, which is people should decide before anybody writes chapter 1 in the beginning, how long this anthology is going to be up. Are you going to take the anthology down and then everybody releases their solo stories? You're going to leave the anthology up, but after a certain period of time, everybody can release their solo stories if they want to, because that's another one of those minefields that if you don't work it out in advance, you get halfway down the road and you step in it and bam, and everything's a mess. So if anybody out there is thinking about that, that's another thing to put on your checklist of issues to talk about up front. So we're coming up actually on an hour. Went by fast, was a lot of fun, at least from this chair. And so let's just go around the circle, such as we are, and give us a brief rundown on your story and tell everybody where to find you. Gail, you want to start?
Sure. Well, the story is Secrets and Ciphers, and Eric Mitchell and Ben Nolan come for a fall holiday and find themselves dealing with an old scandal and solving a 700-year-old Knights Templar mystery. And you can find me online at gailzmartin.com and morganbryce.com, and all of the other social media sites are based on those names. I'm pretty easy to find. Just make sure you get the Z.
And I'm Jeanne Adams, and you can see the spelling. And it's you can find me mostly on Twitter, but I'm also on Facebook and Pinterest and Instagram. And my story is, as I said, an archaeologist has come to explore the secret passages and secret rooms that the Earl and his fiancée stumbled on in Christmas at Caynham Castle, and have all sorts of adventures with ghosts and relic thieves and somebody who really wants them dead. So it's sort of a paranormal romantic suspense, which I tend to like, as you can see from The Witch's Walk. And as Gail said, you can find me on the web by the name.
Well, as I said at the beginning, I'm Nancy Northcott. In my story, which is a second chance at love story, my spies are helping the British Security Service guard a weapons developer whose loyalty is somewhat in question. When her son disappears, at first nobody knows if he just wandered off or if this is something more sinister. And hunting for this child gives them that second chance at love if they have the courage to take it. My website is nancynorthcott.com. I'm on Facebook, not as much as I probably should be, under Nancy Northcott Author. And I spend way too much time on Twitter, where I'm at Nancy Northcott. And you can find me at any of those places. Thank you for joining us, everyone. We really appreciate it.